Hello, I'm Robin Garrow, the president of the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our program this evening. Tonight, we will explore the life and times of Angela Merkel, the Chancellor. Taking us on this journey is her celebrated biographer, Kati Marton, whose research deconstructs the very public life of this deeply private person. This program is co-sponsored by the Graduate Center Office of Public Programs and the acclaimed Leon Levy Center for Biography, which is one of the more than 30 research centers here at the Graduate Center. The Levy Center is a hub for people who write, study, teach, and love biography. Its Fellows program has incubated an impressive list of published works, and the center itself promotes biography through public programs like this one, through its affiliation with the Graduate Center's master's degree program in biography and memoir. This unique program merges the academic resources of the Graduate Center with the experience of published biographers to teach students the art and craft of biography and to introduce emerging authors to the nuts and bolts of getting their work published. Great biographies illuminate and explicate the human experience, the time, the place, the people, and the experiences that have shaped the lives of fascinating people. That is what the Chancellor and tonight's conversation with Kati Marton are about. To get the conversation started, I'm delighted to welcome the director of the Leon Levy Center, Kai Bird, who is also tonight's moderator. Kai is an award-winning historian and biographer. With co-author Martin J. Sherwin, Kai received the Pulitzer Prize for American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Kai's most recent book is The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. Kai?
Thank you, President Garrow, for that introduction, and thank you for attending this special Leon Levy event. Before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that our next event will take place on December 15th, when Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Richard Rhodes will be talking about his new biography of E.O. Wilson. And he will be interviewed by Simon Winchester, another acclaimed biographer. Please mark your calendars and register for this event on the Leon Levy website, and please encourage your friends and relatives to subscribe to our digital mailing list on our website. I'm delighted to be here this evening, virtually, alas, with Kati Marton. I think I first met Kati decades ago, but I really got to know her through her books. I was an admirer of her very first book, published in 1990, The Polk Conspiracy, a fascinating true spy thriller about the murder of CBS News correspondent George Polk. But I also remember reading her 1995 book on Raoul Wallenberg, who rescued 25,000 Jews in Budapest and then disappeared into the Gulag. And then there was her terrific 1996 book, A Death in Jerusalem, a vivid account of the 1948 assassination of Count Folke Bernadette by the Stern Gang. Kati is now the author of a dozen books, including the best-selling Enemies of My People, My Family's Journey to America, and a memoir, Paris, a love story. Kati was born in Budapest, but attended high school in Bethesda, Maryland. She has been honored with many awards, but I don't know anyone else who has received the Commander's Cross of the Order of Merit from the Republic of Hungary, that country's highest civilian honor. That really must be something. Kati and I will hold a conversation about the Chancellor for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up to our virtual audience for questions. Please put your questions in the chat box, and I will try to get to as many as possible. And please go and buy The Chancellor at book.org, a website that will lead you to your local independent bookstore. Kati, it's such a pleasure to welcome you to a Leon Levy event. I only regret that we can't have this conversation in person and then go out to dinner afterwards.
Me too.
Maybe next time.
I hope so. Kai, am I allowed to speak now?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I could have listened all night to your recapitulation of my prior work, some of which have faded into the distant past, but thank you so much. And back at you, fellow biographer. I'm a huge fan, and your book on Oppenheimer and your book about the Bundys, the two Bundy brothers, I think is probably the most vivid and memorable volume on the Cold War and Vietnam and the Johnson era's amazing arrogance of power, how they led us into this.
Well, you know,
war.
biography is very good as a vehicle for conveying a lot of complicated, contentious history.
I totally agree. I think it's the way into history. I think it's the way to pull people into stories that they otherwise think they covered in high school. I'm just really honored to be with you tonight, because your institution and Robin, I thank you as well for the honor. Really is the most august home of great biographers, and I feel very, yes, honored, humbled to now be. This is my first full-blown biography, because the books that you listed, although they have a central character at their core, are really not actually full-blown biographies, as this chancellor.
Right. Well, welcome to the club.
Thank you. I'm sure I'll be getting a notice about dues that I already owe you.
You know, I think of myself as a well-read fellow, and I follow the news and try to, you know, keep up with foreign affairs. But I learned so much from your biography of Angela Merkel. I had this notion that she was kind of just a boring, dowdy German conservative politician. And again, it underscores, you read a biography and suddenly you understand so much more than what you were reading from, you know, the New York Times and the Washington Post about Germany.
By the way, she would be pleased to hear you say that your image of her was of this rather dowdy, boring, unexciting personality, because that is indeed the image that she puts forward. And she is a woman of extraordinarily sturdy ego, who needs very little of the massaging that most politicians need. She's the freest and the least needy politician that I've ever encountered, and you know, maybe a preparation in science, because, as you know, she was a physicist. She came to politics late in life, upon the fall of the wall in 1989, when she first crossed from east to west. I apologize, I'm jumping way ahead, and we'll backtrack to her youth and formation.
Well, you've really unmasked her, because she's far more interesting than I thought. Now, I want to begin with, you know, biographers often say to each other, dead is better. It is better to write about the dead rather than the living.
Dead is better.
And here you have tackled a very much alive politician who's extremely reticent and private. And so why did you choose her, and why did you think that this was a challenge you could undertake?
Well, first of all, had I known then, 5 years ago, when I first approached the subject, how that this would be the Mount Everest of biographies, given her extreme reticence, given the fact that not only is she good and alive, as opposed to all the other people I've written about who are good and dead, but she's in office, and has constructed a sort of a Berlin Wall around herself. And there are a bunch of German biographies of her, but none of them attempt to capture the human story. And for me, the human story was at the heart of this. And the event that really triggered my fascination with her, and at which point I stopped thinking of her as you seem to continue to do until you read my book. I too thought she was this really unexciting, rather dowdy, affectless lady. 2015, when she allowed 1 million, mostly Middle Eastern refugees into a previously extremely white Christian homogeneous society, Germany, and made it work.
That was an astonishing decision.
Yes.
I
At a time when her fellow members of the European Union were busy throwing up barbed wire and building walls. And even the British Prime Minister referred to the migrants as a swarm, and to say nothing of the shameful brutality with which Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, treated them. And so I was just absolutely dumbstruck by the courage of this move, and that's when I decided.
No, it was a very courageous decision, and
yeah,
it makes me ask you: did your own childhood and experience as a refugee perhaps motivate you as well? I mean, you bring your own, as a biographer, you bring your own biography to this. So talk a little bit about that influence and how it motivated.
For sure, yes. Actually, not to in any way compare myself to this most powerful and successful politician in the world, but we do have similar formations. I did send her early on, I'm not stupid, a copy of Enemies of the People, my own memoir of growing up, the child of political prisoners in Hungary. My parents, as you may recall, were jailed when I was 6 years old. They were journalists, and they were jailed and convicted on trumped up charges of being CIA agents.
Right.
And then their trial and so on formed the most memorable chapter of my childhood, obviously, and then came our escape and our slow journey west. And I sent her that book, and her aides assured me that she read it. And so wow. I think that gave me a slight advantage over other writers. So in other words, I wasn't just an American writer, which I am, trying to unmask the chancellor. I was someone with a similar background to hers. Her parents were not arrested, but she lived a kind of internal exile inside the Stasi state of East Germany. Right. And I trace much of her to that.
She didn't try to stop you from doing a biography, but she didn't exactly cooperate much, huh? There were no diaries, no private correspondence.
You know what? I don't think they exist. I think she is so careful and a woman of so few words, and really doesn't trust. Her emails tend to be 3 words, and anybody who betrays her trust is just dead on arrival.
Well, growing up in East Germany with the Stasi, snooping around in every nook and cranny, you would never keep a diary. That would
no. The idea was to call as little attention to yourself as possible, and she already drew attention to herself because she was always the brightest kid in every class. And she was also the daughter of a Lutheran pastor in an atheist state. And which again, enormously important in who she is. It's a very private, like all things with her, private, but deep. And as I started peeling back
Well, you're very good at the early part of the book on her childhood and the first 36 years of her life, 35 years in East Germany before the wall comes down. That's really a great story. And you recreate what it was like for her to live that way. And her father, who you've just mentioned, a Protestant Lutheran minister, who thought the communists and Christians had an identical goal.
Yeah, I mean, the delusion of that. And plus, how about the fact that the father took his family from the security of Hamburg in the West to right into the jaws of the monster, the Soviet Empire.
Yeah, he volunteered to do this. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was a rather forbidding and austere and demanding figure whose approval she never ceased to try to win and never quite succeeded. Neither of her parents ever voted for her.
Ever voted for? I was just astonished at this. Who did they vote for?
The socialists.
The socialists.
Yeah. But I think she, on her side, chose the conservative Christian Democrats as a way of saying, "I'm going my
rebellion."
Yes, it was.
But she was a member of Young Pioneers as a child.
Yes, but you're looking at a former member of the Little Drummers,
okay,
which is the junior Young Pioneers. I used to wear my little red thing and march around the playground drumming, and you could say that I'm an early communist, and but I just wanted to be
a red diaper baby.
Pardon?
A red diaper baby.
I was a red. But so Merkel, she's very honest about why she joined. She joined, for fellowship and for company. But she learned, again, this proved so useful in her subsequent ascent. She learned to spout the Marxist-Leninist platitudes by day and sing the hymns of Marxism, and by night to imbibe the Bible, and her she was as familiar with biblical figures as most of us kids growing up were with Grimm's fairy tales. And again, she is constantly refreshed by that connection and her, but doesn't talk about it. Any other politician would parade that faith. But for her, that would be, she's the most inner directed public person, I think, on the planet. She's her own harshest critic.
So I think you tell a story of her being interviewed by two Stasi agents and asked to
become an
report
agent
on her neighbors and such, and tell us how she got out of that.
Yeah, well, that was her parents had trained her that if the inevitable happens and you're pulled into a Stasi interview along the way, particularly as she was a stellar student of physics and had been accepted to the most prestigious university in East Germany, like University of Leipzig. Just tell them that you're a chatty person and that you would,
a chatterbox, not to be trusted.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to keep a secret, and so that's how she dodged that bullet. But she didn't. As a result, she was held back. She was penalized for that, and it was a black mark. But I think her most painful encounter with the Stasi state was when she discovered that her lab partner, she's now already in Berlin and working in the East German Academy of Sciences, and she befriended this guy who turned out to be an informer, and she had not only befriended him but took him home to meet her parents, which she did very, very rarely. And that was an enormous betrayal. And she uses words so carefully. Words are not.
She said it was a disappointment.
Yeah, that is a big word from her. Yeah, she said, by the way, the same thing after Brexit, a disappointment.
Oh, wow.
When actually it was a devastation for her.
No, this gets to, the heart of her character. She's just amazing. She has such self-control.
Yes.
And stability. and she knows who she is, and she's a conservative Christian Democrat. But that word conservative means, I think, something different in Germany than it does in America today.
Indeed, yes. And even the fact that she's such an obviously lackluster speaker plays well in Germany, which obviously Germany has been burnt by firebrands in the past. So I'm not sure that her style of rhetoric would work on this side of the pond. I wish it would, because what we need are precisely the kind of calm, moderate politicians who, for her, it's never about her. I interviewed her former defense minister, von Gutenberg, love that name, who said that we Germans were looking for someone whose focus would be on us, not on themselves, and we found that person in Merkel. So she never and you can see, I mean, we're already leading up to how she became that person of private and disciplined ego, in a way, oddly, being a product of the East Bloc, which I am as well. So I sympathize with the public reticence, and the fact that you are, for the rest of your life, quite suspicious of people's motives. But that's a plus in politics, that she never gave away, what her game was, and thus.
Well, she was sort of she got into power sort of under the radar too.
Yes.
Her rise was just incredible, and from 1989, when the wall falls down, within 18 months, she's
a minister,
a cabinet minister, a low-ranking cabinet minister, but a cabinet minister. And
yes.
she has a political persona, and she's picked, I guess, because Helmut Kohl was looking for a woman, and someone told him, this woman has a PhD in physics and she's very smart, you should pick her.
Yes, and by the way, the person who recommended her, who was her first boss and the one and only democratically elected president of East Germany in that brief window, she pulled the rug out from under him, as she would with Kohl. So when necessary, she can be ruthless.
She can be very ruthless.
Yeah. So I sometimes felt that I was writing the female equivalent of The Prince, a manual
right.
for women, for how to gain and hold power. I mean, it's all there. It's, and some of it seems so obvious, yet so few politicians are able to follow her example, because they have needy egos, and because they don't have her self-control. And I wish I would like every politician.
It's astonishing. You quote an interview. I guess a lot of these interviews are from before she became.
Yes, I translated every interview she ever gave.
Yeah, and she hasn't spoken as the chancellor about any private life since then.
No,
but anyway, in one of these interviews, I love this quote. You have her saying early on, just after she becomes a cabinet minister in the early 90s, 91, I guess, she says, I have the following problems. I am a woman, I have no charisma, and I'm not good at communicating.
Yeah.
He also disdained glamour. So there was a joke going around Germany that about her clothes. And the joke goes, what does Merkel do with her old clothes? The answer is she wears them.
But by the way, because she's so astute, and she didn't want to waste time, having to deal with the press always commenting on her shabbiness, and So she went to a very good dressmaker in Hamburg and had a closet full of identical but different colored bright jackets and black pants. And I once saw her buying shoes at a department store in Berlin with her security guard, melting into the woodwork as they've been taught to do, because she hates calling attention to herself. And she bought 6 pairs of identical black flats. So she solved the problem. Nobody ever writes about her what she has on her back. She looks fine, but it's of no, she took that off the table, in other words. Same with the hair. I interviewed her hairdresser, who she first visited her hairdresser when she was preparing to meet George W. Bush in the White House. And she was persuaded that she had to up her game a little bit, so she got highlights. And he said that she's been back twice a year for the highlights have been maintained for 20 years, because she understood that looks matter, the visual matters. So she's the most undogmatic person, Kai. Some people reproach her for that she kind of steals from whenever there's a good idea, be it from the socialists or the Greens or the Conservative Party. She goes with it when it gains traction.
Let's talk about her strengths as a politician. It clearly wasn't her wardrobe or her communication skills. So what was it? Her deal making, her ability to keep people talking,
Well, yeah. The fact is that she's brilliant. She has a photographic memory. Can I just insert a personal note here? My example of her photographic memory is that my one and only meal with her was at her request. My late husband, Richard Holbrooke, had recently negotiated the peace in the Balkans, and Merkel is always looking to learn from people who are good at whatever it is they do, be it conductors of orchestras or authors. She likes to learn. And so she asked to have dinner with Richard, and I had the good fortune to be along for that. And Richard, in his typical way, teased her.
Wait a minute, was this the dinner or lunch where Susan Sontag was present?
Yes, I was.
I wanted to ask you about that. That seems so incongruous. Susan Sontag. I know that
the 2 women were studying contrast, and it wasn't the politician who sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was the woman of letters. But at any rate, she was Merkel in those days was the minister for youth and women. Her starter ministry in the Kohl cabinet, and Richard teased her a little bit. I guess he certainly knew of her and her history, and said, "Come on, Angela, you're not interested in either of those, women and children." And she kind of bristled a little bit. So fast forward now, this was on the eve of 9/11, and so now fast forward to 2016 when I first turned up at the chancellery. And as you said, she neither sat down with me nor did she bar my way. We had a brief encounter, and she said, your husband and I got off to a rocky start. And I said, I recall. Oh. And she said, but then I grew fond of him, she said with a twinkle, which was so sweet. But I mean, she remembered this.
That was 16 years earlier.
Yeah. And, obviously she'd had 100,000 such meals since then, but I was just very impressed by that. But that's a long-winded answer to your question of what's her method of operations as a politician. It's that she does her homework more than, and because she's so retentive, when she goes into be it a meeting or a negotiation with, let's say, Putin, she knows the granular details, and so she can call out whoever she faces across the table if they stray from the facts, and she can and often does tell them to go back and do their homework. So there's that. She has tremendous stamina too. She can go. She says she describes herself as having the constitution of a camel, so that in a negotiation she can go for days with little or no sleep, and then she collapses. So she's always the last one to leave the table when there's an inch of ground still to cover, and when there's she wants to make a deal. She works on the premise that there's always a deal to be made if you just stick to it. And now, of course, I can't help but wonder who among the leaders of the West will have that kind of that dogged determination. That she once said that for her, Sisyphus is not a dark character, eternally pushing the rock up only to have it fall back down, because that's how she is. And this is I call her a determined optimist, that she does not believe that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. She does not. She's too familiar with history. She's lived too much history to believe that in the perfectibility of humankind. But nor is she a Kissingerian real politician, because her politics has a very significant humanitarian core, which we saw with the refugees. But it's this I will find a deal mentality that leaves now with her, I fear.
So, Kati, one of the big things that has happened, of course, in our lives with Germany is reunification. And I think people forget that German reunification in the early 90s, it was a scary thing. It was a kind of a shock.
Yes, yes.
It was people worried about the reunification of this large and powerful reconstituted Germany. Russians worried about it.
Which had led to 2 world wars and the Holocaust. Let's not forget.
The Holocaust and Americans. Much of the Cold War was based on the notion that we should maybe keep Germany divided.
Yes, yes. I think it was François Mitterrand who said, "I love Germany so much, let's have 2 of them."
Yeah, exactly. But, it happened. It was going to happen. And yet Merkel's career is wrapped up with this. And yet I noticed, she opposed any notion of offering NATO membership to the Ukraine, knowing, I think, about the Russian sensitivities. She speaks Russian.
Oh, yeah. She and Putin speak each other's languages fluently, which has been an important component of that relationship.
Well, maybe we should talk a little bit about Merkel and Putin and her relationship with bombastic men.
Yeah. Of which she was cursed to have many in her 16 years. She was surrounded by bombastic men, from Erdogan to Orban to Bolsonaro to, let's not forget, Trump. The 4 toughest years of her chancellordom were, of course, when the country she most reveres, the United States, which she credits with her own second chance as well as her country's second chance, and she had in her office a photograph of both Reagan and Bush the elder, who she reveres, and this country should, to her astonishment, pick this bombastic, rather familiar type for a German in Donald Trump. an autocrat who really wasn't interested in delivering for people. And her many Republican friends told her to practice strategic patience and that Trump was a deal maker, just make deals. Obama told her to grab some high ground and hold on to it. Well, that proved impossible. Trump did everything in his powers to shake her iron composure and confidence. Fiona Hill, whom I interviewed for this book and who was often in the room as Trump's Russia advisor, said that Trump was actually very impressed and rather beguiled by her because he style impresses him, and she has a very special allure. It's maybe not obvious in large crowds, but that quiet confidence, and she speaks in a very low voice. She never raises her voice. He told, I guess Hill, Trump did, that he could listen to her all day. I guess it's better than having to read position papers. But he just, the fact he'd never encountered a woman like that. A woman who wasn't trying to please, a woman who wasn't trying to impress, a woman who just was there to get the job done. And so the famous scene where he tosses a couple of Starburst candies that he pulls out of his pocket and tosses them at her and says, "Don't say I never gave you anything, Angela." This was at a summit with the astonished and appalled members of the G8 looking on. Merkel, no reaction, which is of course what drove him crazy. What drives any bully crazy is not to get a reaction. And Putin tried the same thing, unleashed his dog, knowing that Merkel fears dogs, having twice been bitten. Again, that iron self-control, which
you actually have a picture in the book, many photographs, but you have a picture of that scene with the Putin's dog sniffing.
Yes. Oh my gosh, her staff was just furious. And what she said to her staff afterwards, I mean, she had to calm her staff. She said to her staff, he needs to do this. What else does he have? The country has no economy to speak of. They have a lot of oil. So I mean, this is so extraordinary, her ability to take psychic leave, to depersonalize politics, which is such a personal game. I learned so much. I'm not a politician, but I would urge people to read this, even if they're not interested in a political career, because it's about how to get where you want to get without giving away your soul. Because the one thing that she has done, which is astonishing in the age that we live in, the age of social media and oversharing, is that she's kept herself to herself.
Mm-hmm.
Germans don't know much about her either. I'm sometimes asked, as an American, but working on this biography, does the chancellor have grandchildren? I mean, that's how little she.
And yet, one of her campaign slogans was often "You know me." You know me,
which was a winking.
Of course, the Germans don't know her at all. Her private persona.
But they kept re-electing her because they liked what she was delivering. Of course, you already alluded to the fact that not everybody liked what she delivered, namely her fellow East Germans never felt that she had sufficiently acknowledged them, that she, one of them, the most spectacularly successful of them all, obviously the most powerful woman in the world. And how come you don't focus on us? How come you let 1 million Middle Eastern refugees in instead of coming to, well, I mean, she did focus on them in terms of financially, but it wasn't about the economy, stupid. It was about the fact that they felt that she'd undervalued how hard it was for them to suddenly have their country, East Germany, collapse under them and almost overnight vanish. And in her final stretch as chancellor, she has begun to acknowledge that. It's very interesting, listening to her speech of 10 days ago or so, one of her farewell remarks, where she talks about, some journalist had referred to her East German experience as ballast. Is that the right pronunciation of that word, ballast? What you put in a boat to keep it
Right.
keep it ballast. And she took very strong exception to that. Ballast, that was my life. So it was an acknowledgement that the East Germans had their own history. And I think too, Kai, that her sympathy for refugees also in part comes from the fact that in a way she herself is a refugee, because although she didn't leave her country disappeared.
Yeah, she was sort of in internal exile.
Right, and she had to relearn everything, from how to do her hair to how to dress to what were the big rock bands to a different culture.
So Kati, we're running out of minutes. Our conversation is going to have to move to the Q&A soon, but before we do that, I wanted to, the Ukraine and Russian troops massing on the border is in the news. And of course, Angela Merkel played a key role in the diplomacy responding to the Russian invasion of the Crimea.
Absolutely.
And what is your sense of how the new chancellor, the SPD man, is going to, how is he going to respond to what's going on in that? Are we going to war?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I think Biden has had a very strong conversation. It sounds like stronger than with Putin. Stronger, I have to say, than Obama, who gave up on Putin and handed it off to Merkel, and said to Merkel, "He just lies to me all the time." And Merkel said, "Well, that makes two of us." But Merkel didn't have the luxury of not dealing with the Russian colossus, which is in her neighborhood. So she did the hard work of negotiating a ceasefire the last time that Putin invaded Ukraine. And that ceasefire, I mean, it's been a cold peace, if peace you can call it, but it stopped him in his tracks. And equally importantly, she organized EU sanctions against Russia, which bit. And now, I to answer your question more directly, I think her successor, who ran on a Merkel continuum, even adopting her signature hand gesture, for which there's an emoji in Germany. So he may be a social democrat, but Merkel was no more strictly a Christian Democrat than he's a social democrat. Merkel is a post-party politician. As I said, she took from everybody, and I think that is more. I don't expect a dramatic change. However, nobody can repeat or reproduce her remarkable journey from this East German hamlet in the woods of Brandenburg, through science to the West, and then to the very top of the leadership of the West, to becoming, I mean, it's a story that is as astonishing as it is unique. So that is all of which to say that trajectory, that narrative gives her a stature and a uniqueness that that her successors will not have, and they look to be like fairly boring men anyway.
Uh-oh, boring men.
Just another bunch of, hey, listen, I'm all for boring men. It beats the alternative, but I prefer boring women, just between ourselves. And
well, boring
she's
but
not
competent.
boring.
Competent.
Yes, yeah. That I misspoke. She's not. She'd like us to think she's boring, but she's not. First of all, she has a killer sense of humor. Second, she likes to have a good time. She Tony Blair was quite taken aback that not only is she the last to leave the negotiating team, she's the last to leave the bar.
And she enjoys going to a bar and having a drink and watching soccer.
Yes. Oh, she's a fanatic. Yeah, she's a soccer fanatic. Yes. I had to learn a little bit of soccer too. Not my.
So, Kati, let's take a few questions from our virtual audience. Let's see. In what languages did you conduct your interviews for the book?
This must be from a fellow craftsperson. Is this from
Maybe.
Would be. So I grew up with rudimentary German, and then I was the ABC news correspondent in Germany. So I have working German, but when I traveled outside Berlin for interviews, as I did in tracking her, I always took a German-speaking friend or student or whomever to do the translations. In the capital, everybody speaks English in her circle. So
you could do the interviews in English.
Absolutely, yeah. But the interviews that I did with with politicians from the Alternative für Deutschland, the far right party, if they speak English, they won't let on that they do. So those I had to do in German, but with the presence of a more sophisticated German speaker than I am.
And then you, as I understand it, you had to go back and find all the old interviews that she'd given before she became chancellor and get them translated. And...
Yes, mining for gold. Yeah, and there was some gold.
So here's another question. Once Angela Merkel has taken a rest, she's now just left office. Do you think she will seek to involve herself in European affairs? Once you have taken a rest, do you have an idea for your next book?
Oh, that is so sweet. Yeah. Do you have any ideas for me?
I just finished my Carter book. I published it in June on Jimmy
Okay, so
Carter.
we have to have a conversation about that.
And I'm still looking for a new project. It's 6 months later.
Honestly, was it Hemingway who said that if you're not completely wrung out after you finish a book, you haven't done a good job? I feel wrung out. I really do, in a way that I haven't with any other book. This was super stressful, especially under COVID for the last couple of years.
Right.
Anyway, you be the judge as to whether I nailed it or not. But I have some ideas, but I'd like to also rejoin the human race for a little bit.
We all want to do that. So do you think Merkel's going to have a second career?
I think that she's free for the first time in her life. 35 years under the Stasi, 16 years as chancellor, always surrounded this very private woman. I think she's going to savor her freedom. And with her scientist's eyes, she will observe her own reaction to that freedom. One thing we know about her, she will not be rushed, always takes her own time. And then I strongly suspect that she will return, and unfinished is her climate her climate program, which she announced 2 years ago would dominate her final years. And then 6 weeks after she made that speech came COVID, and she became the COVID manager. And climate, of course, needs her leadership. I also think that she will do, now that she's no longer obliged to keep telling women that I'm chancellor of all Germans. I'm not the woman's chancellor, and I think she will do more for women's empowerment in places like Africa. Mm-hmm. I have a strong hunch that will be among her interests.
So here's another long comment question. She struck me as the first post-war German chancellor who didn't feel she had to overperform for atonement, for instance. She felt it deeply and was intensely aware and supportive of Germany's efforts to come to terms with the past, but seemed to continue this work more with actions rather than bluster or grand gestures. A number of previous male chancellors from the West seem to have had more complex personal and family histories and often seem to be trying too hard to distance themselves. She seems incredibly confident. She completed a number of memory projects with a quiet humility. So I don't know.
All of that is absolutely true, but it is Merkel who made Germany's debt to the Jewish people a foundational, a pillar of Germany's, how shall I put it, raison d'etre. So non-bombastic is correct, but one of her early trips was to Israel, where she was the first chancellor to speak at the Knesset, and where she said that our debt to you is without limits, because of the heinous crimes for which we are responsible, and this again puts her somewhat at odds with many East Germans, because East Germany, unlike West Germany, never went through. The Germans have this, they love these Lego words where they just add syllable after Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which means, that's one word, which means processing of the past, which the West did in a very serious, really impressive way. The atonement and redemption. A confrontation, atonement, redemption for their dark, truly terrible history. The East persuaded itself that they were the good Germans, that the Nazis were in the West. We are the resistance German. We are guilt-free, and therefore don't share in Merkel's view that. And that has kind of had an impact on the right wing's ability to plant itself in the East. Anyway, that's a big problem, which the union of East and West, I can tell you don't want me to go on too much longer on this subject because we have other questions, but the union, it's an imperfect union between East and West.
So here's another question about Putin and Russia. What do you make of the claim that Putin Russia rose to power due to Merkel's diminishment of nuclear energy and thus made Germany dependent on Russia's natural gas? That's a bit of a convoluted question, but
yeah. I fault her for the Nord Stream deal, and Merkel, the pragmatist, won out over Merkel, the stateswoman in making that deal. She is, she is, among other factors, a calculating politician whose one of her mantras is the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. She weighs factors. She is chancellor of Germany, first of all, not of Europe. And the German car industry is highly influential, both in her dealings with China, which have been tremendously important. We haven't gotten to that. I don't think we have time now to talk about how many trips she's made to Beijing, but I spent quite a bit of time in the book about that. She started going there in 2005 and has gone every year, and has made deals with the Chinese that not everybody thinks she should have, given their recent record vis-a-vis the Uyghurs. Just to bring it back to where we were at the beginning, she's not an idealist. She's a pragmatist. She deals with the world as she finds it, not as she would like it to be. And dealing with Putin and getting Nord Stream, Putin has never played games with Germany, cutting off gas he hasn't blackmailed Germany the way he has other countries. But nevertheless, it's a questionable move. By the way, it was her predecessor, Gerhard Schroeder, who struck that deal, but she could have vetoed.
Right.
Anyway, I went on too long on that. I'm sorry.
No, that's a current issue. It's a hot topic, and
well,
it's
it
going to
is.
affect Ukraine and.
Yes. I hope that I was about to say, I hope that Biden reads my book about how to negotiate with Putin. But he seems to be doing all right, even without my book.
Well, Merkel seems, both a pragmatist, and yet there are these moments like on the refugee policy, yes, and also on her decision after the nuclear accident in Japan, where she announced that they're closing all the German nuclear plants just for safety reasons. And
again, a combination of humanitarian reasons and political factors. She thus robbed the Greens of their biggest issue.
It was very Machiavellian of her to do that.
But on the other hand, Germans, unlike the French, have a fear of nuclear power. It's interesting. It's a national kind of phobia. So,
and she's a physicist, so she understands.
She understands the risks. She does. Yeah, all of that.
So Kati, on that note, I think we're going to end. It's now 7 o'clock, a little after. And I want to thank all our large number. We have over 200, 300 people on this Zoom event. I want to thank you all for joining. I also want to encourage everyone to go out and buy the book.
Yes, please.
It's a terrific read. It's not an overly long biography, and it's extremely well written and draws you in and explains Angela Merkel's incredible odyssey. So on that note, thank you. And thank you to everyone who's joined us. And Kati, some of us are going to adjourn now to yet another Zoom meeting to a smaller group. And I hope everyone who's been invited to that can click on the new Zoom link, and I'll see you in a moment.
Thank you, Kai, and thank you everybody who joined. It's been such a pleasure. Kai, you're such a generous fellow author. I really appreciate it, and I hope sometime to be able to return the favor and make you look as smart as you've made me look and feel.
Well, thank you. I know how hard it is to write a biography.
Oh my God, yes.
All right, good night, everyone. And please join us on December 15th with Richard Rhodes.
Oh, yes, I'm gonna be there.
Good night.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.